However, by far the most touching and impactful thing I think we did was the high-level statement we were able to get. The last 2 days of the conference were devoted to allowing every single country and a couple of UN organizations, as well as all the official constituents of the UNSCC, time to give a short speech, about 5 minutes or so, on the conference and then climate change, on basically whatever they wanted. We weren't initially included in that group, but we lobbied to be a part of that group, and we were able to successfully get into the high-level statement segment, and we are actually placed as the last group to go, which was, I think, a good thing for us. And one thing I want to say about this is we had, before we started speaking, we had the sidewalls and the back lined with youth. So we were all just sitting down on the ground in a couple of rows. And then at a certain point during the speech, when we spoke about the youth rising up and to tackle the challenge of climate change, we all got up and put our hands in the air. And I think that was a pretty powerful moment, as well as we had one of the children who was there and had previously written a poem about how she was afraid that the world was going to die, and we ended with that. And after this speech was over, there were a number of official delegates who were actually crying. So I have a short clip of that as well.
We have one climate, one future, and this is our last stand. The science is clear. We call on you to acknowledge that climate change is not bound by economics or politics, but by science. And you cannot negotiate the laws of chemistry or physics. The targets that are being discussed here are not even close enough to protect our future. I can explain you. The flipping of this coin represents gambling with our future. It's a 50-50 chance. What will it be?
History will judge whether you did enough to give us a final way of living on. The time for excuses is over. We need to acknowledge that a solution to climate change means the just transition to eliminate fossil fuels within our lifetime. We are inspired by those of you who are taking real leadership, both at home and internationally. And we are ashamed of those countries that are delaying action in this UN process and who are actively compromising our future. If you lead us in the wrong path, we have no time to find our way back and undo your decision. The potential impact is devastating and indiscriminate. The world is watching. The youth are rising. Join us.
So what about the actual conference? What happened there? The conference started out with very high hopes. The 4th IPCC assessment had come out, and so there is increased scientific certainty, more so than ever, on climate change. There's increased awareness also about climate change. Australia had just announced a couple of days prior to the start of the conference that it planned to ratify Kyoto, even though it was late in the game and thought that was important to do. And the IPCC and Al Gore had just received the Nobel Peace Prize. So there was a lot of momentum building going into this conference. And I think there was a real sense at the start that a Bali breakthrough could definitely happen. But then there was also reasons why the Bali breakthrough would not happen. I think the U.S. had a bit of optimism in the beginning as well and said publicly that nothing was off the table. And by the second week, they were admitting that yes, in fact, as far as they were concerned, binding targets were off the table. And binding targets being the only real thing that makes these agreements worthwhile is if countries actually agree that they're going to do this. And one of the interesting things that they also said is that the headline of this particular slide is, the U.S. is leading, other countries must fall in line and follow. And that was by Jim Cunnington, who is the second in line for the U.S. negotiators. And as you can imagine, that was humorous enough to us that we actually were distributing that around the conference and saying, well, look, everybody, the U.S. is leading. What are you all doing? One of the interesting things is in another meeting, the U.S. official delegation was asked, negotiations involve compromise. What do you see that developing countries have gotten out of these negotiations so far? And this was into the second week. And the U.S. response is, well, we think they've got a pretty good deal on technology transfer and adaptation funding, which was humorous again, because the U.S. in that particular situation had got it almost exactly what it wanted, and the developing countries had gotten nearly nothing of what they would have liked. So our particular line, and again, this is not the line of Clarkson University, this is the line of SustainUS and International Youth, was that the official delegation does not really represent us. And that was a message that was very well received by the international community and the other official party delegates. They were happy to hear about what was going on in the States and what was going on in college campuses and all the other places where real action is occurring on climate change, because they don't necessarily get to hear that so much. And it was really exciting to them because there were a number of delegations who, in talking with them, seemed genuinely committed at this conference to really doing the right thing. At whatever cost, they would work that out. But first and foremost, they wanted to make sure they got an agreement that was what was needed. One of the interesting things that happened between the U.S. delegation, actually I'm going to jump back just for 1 second here. Part of the reason we chose to spread the message that the U.S. delegation doesn't represent us is that their position is fairly well established. Even the environmental groups weren't really pressuring them very much because they're not going to move. Nobody could really imagine what it would take to get them to change their position. So that wasn't really the line that we took. We didn't really exactly lobby the U.S. delegation too hard. Rather, we lobbied the other delegations to say, look, let's not worry about the U.S. right now. Hopefully, we'll have a better government sometime soon.